Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for attending, and we greatly appreciate it. I am Siobhan Andrews, student president of the new University of Arizona Global Campus Women in STEM organization. As an information technology student here, I am thrilled to say that the University of Arizona Global Campus Women in STEM is a student-led organization that focuses on STEM careers for women. Our club includes the UAGC Women in Technology International Chapter, better known as WITI, and the UAGC chapter of Girls Who Code, College Loop. Today we're going to talk about building your legacy. But before we can talk about that, we must define it. So what is a legacy? Well, Merriam-Webster describes it as something that is handed down from our ancestors, predecessors, or from the past. So today we're going to learn how to build from experiences of our speakers. And I don't know about you, but I'm ready to hear their stories. But before we can listen, I would like to thank you again for joining us, and I will pass it over to our officers to introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carey Seuss, Vice President.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mayan Colden, and I am the Secretary.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yam Mitchell, and I'm your Communication Officer.
And hello, everyone. I am Dr. Karen Lynn Daniels-Ivy. I am the Department Chair of our Technology Studies organization. We are so excited about this webinar today. Oh my goodness, we are in a position to hear from a set of legacy pioneers who have been extremely helpful, beneficial, successful within their STEM walks today. One once said that your legacy grows with each new experience, and we are in for a wonderful experience today. So take notes and sit back and you will gain something for sure. This webinar is a historical gathering of legacy STEM pioneers. Thank you to all of our panelists who will be speaking on the panel today. And also thank you to the historically Black colleges and universities who are joining us today. Throughout the webinar, we'll have you to place in chat hello, so later on we can recognize you, your name, and the name of your HBCU in attending. And so without any further delay, I would like to welcome to the mic Carey, who will introduce to us our speakers for the event today. Carey, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Again, good afternoon and welcome. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our esteemed speakers. While I share their accomplishments, Mayan will post in the chat full bios on each speaker. Our first speaker has dedicated his life to the service of the United States as a Marine Corps Major General and then as a NASA administrator. Welcome, Major General Charles F. Bolden Jr. After graduating from the United States Naval Test Pilot School in 1979, Bolden was selected as an astronaut candidate by NASA, then becoming an astronaut in August of 1981. In July of 98, he was promoted to the final rank of Major General and assumed his duties as the Deputy Commander, United States Forces, Japan. He later retired from the military in 2004. Fast forward to 2009, he was appointed by President Barack Obama to be the 12th NASA administrator. Today, he serves as CEO of the Charles F. Bolden Group, LLC, a veteran-owned small business specializing in aerospace, national security, leadership, and education. Our second speaker, retired Colonel of the United States Air Force, Dr. Guillen Guy Bluford Jr., was the first African-American to fly in space in 1983. He was also the first African-American to return to space 4 times, to be awarded NASA's coveted gold astronaut pin, and the first African-American to be awarded the United States Air Force Command Pilot Astronaut Wings. He was inducted into the International Space Hall of Fame in 1997, the U.S. Astronaut Hall of Fame in 2010, and the National Aviation Hall of Fame in 2019. He has been awarded numerous awards, including the Department of Defense's Superior Service. Our third speaker, Cheryl Mcnair, is the founding chairman of the Houston-based Dr. Ronald E. Mcnair Education Science Literacy Foundation, one of the several foundations that bear her late husband, Ronald Mcnair's name. As chairperson, she does what her husband said he wanted to do after the Challenger mission, which is teach. In February 1984, Cheryl's husband became just the second African American to reach space, serving as a mission specialist aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. Ronald Mcnair was a crew member of the Challenger's final flight on January 28, 1986. Mcnair's legacy endures through various programs that bear his name. Founded in 1996, the Dr. Ronald E. Mcnair Educational Science Literacy Foundation encourages students from kindergarten through college in areas of STEM. Cheryl Mcnair is known for her work on NASA, Triumph and Tragedy, and Challenger, the final flight. Our fourth speaker, Ed Dwight, is the first African American to be trained as an astronaut and the sculptor of major monuments. Pursuing his dream of flying jet aircraft, Mr. Dwight joined the United States Air Force in 1953, becoming an Air Force test pilot, and in 1961 earned a degree in aeronautical engineering from Arizona State University. In the mid-1970s, turned to art and studied at the University of Denver, receiving a Master's of Fine Arts and gained a reputation as a sculptor. Ed Dwight Studios in Denver is now one of the largest privately owned production and marketing facilities in the Western United States. Dwight has sculpted great works of celebratory African-American art, including international monuments to the Underground Railroad in Detroit, Michigan, and Windsor, Ontario. Currently, he has 35 major works, some of which are on permanent display at the Smithsonian Institute. Our final speaker, Captain Willie Daniels, was fascinated with aviation from an early age and eventually majored in aviation, completing his degree at the Metropolitan State College of Denver. His first airline job was as a flight attendant with United Airlines. In the meantime, he built his flying time and finally landed a position as a pilot with United. He advanced through ranks and is currently a B777 captain flying international routes. He is the founding CEO of Shades of Blue, which fosters STEM education in the minority community. He is now the president of Shades of Blue. I hope you're looking forward to learning from our speakers as much as I am. I now pass on the mic to Dr. Karen Ivey.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks for all of the background on our excellent speakers for today. I'm going to pass the mic over to Maya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Women in STEM. I am going to introduce our first speaker, which will be Major General Charles Bolden.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Ivey, thanks for inviting me to participate in this session. I'm actually going to keep my remarks very brief because I want to hear the rest of the speakers. I have a special relationship with most of them, particularly Guy and Ed Dwight. They're both sort of heroes and role models for me. And Cheryl Mcnair, she knows that I would not be here in this panel today were it not for her late husband, Ron Mcnair, because when I came out of high school in C.A. Johnson High School in Columbia, South Carolina, and finally got to the Naval Academy, two things I knew I was not going to do. One was become a Marine, the other one was fly airplanes. And here we are all these years later, and I ended up doing both. So I would say to the folk who are participating or listening in to this webinar, use that as a lesson. Don't ever say no to anything. Take advantage of every opportunity that's offered to you, and grow, as the saying goes, grow where you're planted. I'll tell you the story about Ron. You know, Ron, for those of you who have ever read about him, was a person who always, from as early as his family can remember, was not wanted to be, but was going to be an astronaut. And my favorite story of Ron, because we grew up about 42 miles from each other, he in Lake City, South Carolina, which is it's a little town. If you blink, you miss it when you go through it. And I grew up in the capital city, Columbia, South Carolina, with no desire whatsoever to ever go to space or to be an astronaut. And Ron, knowing that there were certain things that he would need academically, he knew he was going to need physics and he was going to need calculus. They did not offer those in Carver High School. We both grew up in the segregated South in the 50s and 60s. Ron's a bit younger than I, but Ron went to the public library in Lake City and asked if he could check out two books, one on calculus and one on physics. And he was politely told by the librarian, no, he could do neither. And he was asked to leave. And Ron said, I'm not leaving until I get the two books. And finally, the librarian resorted to calling the local police chief And Lake City was so small, everybody knew everybody, and the policeman knew Ron, and he pleaded with Ron to leave. And he finally, before he had to do anything drastic, he called over to Carver High School and asked for Mrs. Mcnair, who was a teacher there. And Mrs. Mcnair ran over to the library and tried to get Ron to leave, and he wouldn't. And finally, the police chief came up with a brilliant idea, and he told the librarian, I tell you what, I'll check out the 2 books, and I'll bring them back to you when I'm finished with them. And he gave the books to Ron. Ron taught himself calculus and physics. And I guess the rest is history, because he went to North Carolina A&T, where he was an honor grad, and then went to MIT, where he earned his master's in laser physics, his PhD in laser physics. And I had no such aspirations, but I did end up as a test pilot at a place called Patuxent River, Maryland. And the good fortune that I had was that Ron Mcnair, during his candidacy, came back for a reunion at the test pilot school with a number of the Navy and Marine Corps astronaut candidates who had graduated from the U.S. Navy's test pilot school. And I saw this young, strappy-looking, bearded black kid getting out of the back of this sleek-looking T-38, and I instantly ran over to meet him, because I didn't know Ron before that. And we talked the whole weekend. And before he got ready to get back into his supersonic jet and go back to Houston, he asked me if I was going to apply for the space program. And I looked at him and I said, not on your life. And he looked at me incredulously and said, why not? I said, Ron, they never picked me. And he said, you know, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. How do you know if you don't ask? He embarrassed me more than anything else, because my mom and dad, who had been teachers all their lives, my father was my high school football coach, who had taught me that he had a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. My mother had taught me you can do anything you want to do if you're willing to study hard, work hard, and never be afraid of failure. Don't ever let anybody else define you or tell you what you can't do. So having been embarrassed appropriately by Ron, he got in his T-38 and they flew back to Houston, and I quickly went home and told my wife, you know what, I'm going to apply for the space program. I don't stand a snowball's chance in hell of being selected, but I owe it to my mom and dad and myself to apply. And I did, and was startled to find that I was invited to come to Houston and interview for the program. And then even more shocked to find in the end that I was selected. So quick lesson for the young people who are there. Never, ever, ever give up on yourself. Never doubt your own capabilities. Do what you know how to do. Do it well, and things will work out pretty good, no matter how they do. And you're gonna hear a phenomenal story from Ed Dwight, who I said is my hero, because things didn't work out exactly the way that he thought, but he is the one who smiles now, because he is one of the world's greatest sculptors in my mind, and hopefully he's going to tell you a little bit about how he overcame adversity and is now someone that other people idolize as much as I do. So let me stop there, Dr. Ivy, and pass it off to the next, back to you, or off to the next speaker. I'm sorry, Mayan, go ahead.
Thank you for sharing with us today. Next, we have Dr. Guion S. Bluford Jr.
It's good to see all of you. It's my pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Ivy, for inviting me. It's interesting enough. People ask me, did I want to be an astronaut when I was a kid? Well, I grew up in the 1940s and 1950s. So for me, flying in space was a comic book thing. People just didn't do that. But I got interested in airplanes, and as a kid, I made lots of model airplanes and read books on airplanes, and I was fascinated with airplanes, particularly how they were made and how they flew. And it was an interesting time because we were in the midst of the Cold War, and so the Navy and Air Force were constantly developing airplanes all the time. And so if you asked me as a kid what that airplane is, I could definitely tell you what it was. And I could probably tell you how fast it flew and how high it flew and that sort of thing. So I became interested in airplanes as a kid and tried to stay with it. I was very fortunate in the sense that I grew up in an integrated neighborhood, so I had great public schools. I also had great role models. My mother was a school teacher, and my father was a mechanical engineer. And so he enjoyed what he did. And I sort of made a decision as a kid that when I become an adult, I wanted to do something that I really enjoyed doing. So for me, becoming an engineer was high on my list. As I grew up, my heroes were engineers. Jack Northrop of Northrop Corporation, Kelly Johnson of Lockheed running the Skunk Works, and Dick Whitcomb of NASA. These are the guys who were developing the latest and greatest of airplanes. And by the time I got into high school, I pretty much knew that I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And I knew that I needed to work on my STEM stuff, my science and math stuff, and make sure that I gained as much background as I could. And I tried to do that while I was going through high school. In 1960, I applied to Penn State. For me, Penn State was my number one choice because it had a department in aerospace and aeronautical engineering. And I was very fortunate to get accepted. And so from 60 to 64, I was at Penn State. When I went to Penn State, I envisioned myself getting a degree in aerospace engineering and going to work for McDonnell Douglas or Boeing or some of the great aircraft companies. But I went to a school that had mandatory ROTC, something that I'd never really considered. So I took mandatory ROTC. All of us had to take two years of mandatory ROTC. And I made a decision that I would go advanced ROTC and start my career in the Air Force. And so that's what I did. So I went to advanced ROTC. My plan was to go into the Air Force as an engineer. But between my junior and senior year, I went to ROTC summer camp and found out that I could fly airplanes. And I said, wow, I could fly airplanes. So in my senior year, I was a pilot candidate for the Air Force. And I went through my private pilot. I got my private pilot's license as part of the ROTC program. And so when I graduated in 64, I had a degree in aerospace engineering. I had my private pilot's license, and I was a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. I went to pilot training at Williams Air Force Base. And upon graduation, I got fighters. It was interesting going to Williams because I had never seen a black pilot. I had heard about the Tuskegee Airmen, but I'd never really met one. And I was fortunate enough to see my first black pilot. His name was Chappie James. Towards the end of pilot training, we had a fighter pilot come in with his F4 and to talk to us about flying fighters. And I was anxious to hear this guy talk. And then I was amazed to find out that he was a black guy. He was a full colonel black guy who talked about flying jet airplanes. So I'm pretty sure that got me excited and really got me into fighters. I ended up flying fighters, and then after that, I was an instructor pilot for 5 years. And I knew after I started being an instructor pilot that I really wanted to get back into engineering. And so I took a bunch of courses from the University of California, Berkeley, in preparation of going to grad school. I wasn't sure how I was going to go to grad school. I was thinking about getting out of the Air Force and going to grad school on the GI Bill. But just prior to my commitment to the Air Force came to an end, I applied for a program at the Air Force, and the Air Force decided to send me back to grad school. And so I was very fortunate to go back to grad school to get a master's degree in aerospace engineering. I enjoyed the experience so much that, hey, Air Force asked me to stay on for a PhD, and that's what I did. And then after doing that, I ended up being an aerospace engineer at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. For me, that was a great job. I was a flyer who was in the midst of running an engineering branch that was doing a lot of high-end aero work for the Air Force as well as everybody else. I ran a branch that did work not only in the Air Force, but we worked with NASA and DARPA and the Navy and really the Israelis. So it was just an exciting experience all the way around. In 77, 78, I had to go back to a flying job. and I started looking around for a flying job. I wanted something that I could use my technical skill as well as fly. And I was starting to have problems looking around the Air Force to try and find a job that I could use my technical skill as well as my flying skill. And at the same time, NASA was looking for astronauts. I really hadn't thought about being an astronaut at the time because I'm basically an airplane guy. But I applied anyway because it gave me an opportunity to use my technical skill and learn a lot about the space program. So I applied in '78. I was one of 8,000 people who applied. I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised to recognize that I was a candidate, a finalist in the program. But I recognized when I saw the other finalists that I didn't think very highly of my possibility of being selected. But in January of '78, I came to work one cold morning. I had heard on the radio that NASA had selected 35 astronauts, and I got a call later on that morning indicating that I had been selected. So I was totally thrilled with the opportunity to come to the space program. For me, going into NASA, it was a great experience because it gave me an opportunity to learn about the space side of the business. And I also came on board to work for 8 people, both in the astronaut as well as in the program. So it was a great experience for me all the way around. I also enjoyed the fact that I came in at a time when we were still developing the shuttle. So I got to see the development of the vehicle, help work in some of these simulators, did the training, and I was at Edwards Air Force Base in '81 when STS-1 came in and landed, and I realized we really had a fabulous machine when John and Crip brought the airplane in. So I was looking for an opportunity to fly like all the other astronauts in the program. And in '82, I was told that given an opportunity to fly on STS-8. And in '83, I flew for the first time on Challenger. I flew on a night flight, which was unique because we had never flown the vehicle at night. I had the responsibility of putting a satellite into orbit, which I did. And then I also worked with some of the other guys with some of the experiments on board. It was a fabulous experience. When I got down, I realized that I really wanted to stay around to fly again, not only because I liked the experience, but also to encourage some of the other Black astronauts in the program to fly. I wanted to be a mentor for them, to encourage them to fly as well. I had an opportunity to fly again in '85 on a US-German flight. We put a laboratory in space. I was a senior mission specialist on that and had to learn a lot of different scientific things in order to do 76 different experiments on board the shuttle, including learning how to speak German, which was an interesting challenge for me. We had the accident in '86, and I really wanted to stay around to make sure we flew the shuttle again. And I owed it to those people who had gotten killed, including Ron Mcnair. And then I had an opportunity to fly in '90 on STS-39, which was a Department of Defense flight looking at Star Wars, supporting the Strategic Defense Initiative Office. We did it was a fancy, very complicated flight where we deployed and retrieved an experimental payload on orbit. And then finally, in December of '92, I flew on a classified DoD flight, which I also was the principal guy with reference to deploying the satellite. So I had an opportunity to fly 4 times in the space program, an exciting experience all the way around. After, what do I do next? Well, I returned to the aerospace program. I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. And as a result, I came to Cleveland and joined a small company, 8A minority-owned company, and we won a major contract at NASA Glenn, $185 million, 400 people, and I ran an operation where I had 76 PhDs, and we did all sorts of high-level aero work. So I returned to the thing that I loved, and that was being an aerospace engineer. So when I look back on my career, basically I'm an aerospace engineer who's been a fighter pilot, who's been a scientist, who's been an astronaut. And I owe that all to STEM and the training that I got growing up in Philadelphia.
Great story, Dr. Bluford. I mean, it's so inspiring to hear about your exciting. It's exciting. You said something about experiments in space. That was just, I can't even imagine that. It was just so inspiring to hear your story. So I really appreciate you sharing with us. Next, we have Mrs. Sharon Mcnair.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be with this esteemed panel. Oh, my goodness. Thank you so much. And thank you for remembering Ron as someone, as an astronaut and inspired people. And that indeed is his legacy. That's what he wanted to do, was inspire, especially our youth, that they can do whatever they want to do, but with a lot of hard work and knowing that there might be some obstacles that will come into place, and to work past those obstacles. And I have been also asked to talk about perhaps my role or what I did as a spouse. And so I will try to kind of intermingle a little of how I felt and what I wanted to do as far as what Ron did and supporting him. And so I was a teacher and taught for many years, elementary school. And I also became, after Ron was accepted at the Space Center, I became actually a technical writer. I helped to write some of the books that explained how to operate the payload bay terminal system, and that operated the experiments in the middle of the space shuttle, in the payload bay of the space shuttle. I think they used my lesson plans as skills to explain how to, which buttons and what took place in those experiments and what to do, kind of to break it down into layman's terms. Because this was the era where lay people were flying in space, and where they were helping with the space shuttle, and therefore they needed writing that more lay people and people of other countries could more easily understand. And so we had a workbook that I worked on through Ford Aerospace that was also at that time working with NASA. And very interesting to talk to the scientists and then kind of break it down into layperson's terms, what to do to operate this. But getting back with my husband, with my late husband, this would be so delighted by Ron. He would be so happy to know that his life could be seen as such a inspiration. This is something that he actually wanted to return back to South Carolina after his last mission to inspire, especially those in his hometown and his state, and let them know that they too, coming from any kind of background, and Ron came from an impoverished background, so that they could achieve as high as they'd like to, and not to let anything turn them back. You've heard from General Bolden about his library experience when he tried to check out a book after his school no longer had the kind of books that he needed as high a level. And so he went to the library to check that out, and that obstacle there, because they didn't want to allow him, a person of color, to get such a book. But he was able to do it. He was able to get through that obstacle, and it's been explained to you how, as well as when Ron became valedictorian of his high school class. along with being captain of the baseball team, captain of the football team, etc. He just excelled and worked hard at each of those areas. And that's what he believed. If you want to do something, you work hard at it and to the best of your ability. And when he graduated from high school, he wanted to get a degree in physics. Well, they did not allow it at that time for a person of color to study such a field as physics. And so thus he went to North Carolina A&T. And there he confronted another obstacle, kind of in his mind, one that he saw that people from other schools that were up north or had much more sophisticated equipment that they worked with and how they talked. And he began to wonder in his mind, well, can I do this? Can I read? I didn't work with that kind of equipment. I think he said the highest I did was mixing up Kool-Aid with water, and that was a challenge, but he was just being funny at that time. But his point was he began to question whether he could indeed study physics and be successful at that. But he went to the counselor and took a battery of tests. He explained his situation to her, and she said, let's take some tests. And he did. He took those tests, and when he went back, he said she looked up at him and looked down at the tests, looked back at him and said, you know what? I think you can do this. I really think you can do this. And so with that bit of encouragement, he took that and worked hard. And he knew he could play a saxophone well. That was not a challenge, but he took the challenge. And he said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the challenge. And he did, and did very well. He earned his PhD from North Carolina A&T, and then off to MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he heard even the janitors had slide rules. So he knew that the people there were so highly intelligent, and he again began to wonder, oh, I don't know, can I do this? Again, I came from Lake City, South Carolina, Little Lake City. Although I already made it through North Carolina, can I do this? Because these people have come from really big schools and all over. So what he did was went ahead and tried it. He said, well, I'm going to try it. And so he took the challenge again. He tried it. He did come across another obstacle, and that was the challenge of the qualifying exam. Didn't do as well as he expected on that, and got a little discouraged. But then, he said he could hear his counselor tell him, you can do this. He had worked some already with his professors, and the professor in physics said, I think you can do it. And so with that encouragement, again, taking the challenge, well, he got up maybe a little wounded, but he still got up, as he described this as a prize fight. He said he got up from the ring and he got up and still came out. He said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this again, and I'll come out slugging. And indeed, he tried it again. He said, I'm going to work a little harder, and he did work a little harder. Well, he came across another exam that was another difficult one. Again, this one didn't come out as he expected. I wanted it. And so he lay there, he said, with stars going around his head, wondering if he could should he really continue with this? But not being one to back away, and again, knowing that he can face challenges, and he's done that before and won, it said, I believe I can do this. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it again with even more work and longer hours. And that's what he did. And this time, later on, he was able to walk across that canvas and hold on to the side rails and say the ropes and say, I did it. I got it. I got my degree. I can take this challenge. I took them all on. And so that's what another message he would like for people to know, students especially, that you may come across challenges. Obstacles may come in your way, but work past them. Do harder work, maybe work longer hours, but try to the highest, to the best of your ability. And another thing that I found wonderful in his character, I saw that as a spouse, and in meeting him, this person seemed to be calm and seemed to have that quality that I liked, and seemed to be someone who also knew how to handle situations that were perhaps difficult. I'm talking about in karate. He believed in being well-rounded, and he could play the saxophone. He could do karate, and again, to the highest, to the best of his ability, Ron became a master, a 6th-degree black belt in karate. And so I'm saying that I first met this calm man, and the next thing I knew, during the time period that I dated him, he went to karate tournaments and was a master at these tournaments. And especially at one where he came, he was the master, he had won that tournament, had fought fiercely. I was in a dance class, and this was through our church there in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And this man had finished fighting fiercely. And we were walking, I was walking towards the sidewalk. We were going towards a house where we had a dinner. There was a Wednesday night dinner party for Christians where we discussed things of the day. We discussed how as Christians we could solve things or what we would do. And as we walked, as I saw him on the sidewalk and we came together, a little kitten ran out from under the hedges. And Ron reached down and picked the kitten up and started stroking it. And it just showed me a very kind, a very nice side of him. And I thought, this is a nice person. This is what I like in a person. Someone who can be nice, someone who can also take care of business when necessary and be calm about solving situations. I went to his lab at MIT and saw this contraption, oh my goodness, of all the tubes that were connected together. And I thought, that is quite a brilliant mind to connect all these tubes and know what each one is going to do. And I was impressed with that, the intelligence. And these were things that I looked for in a person. And I thought that was wonderful to see, as well as when we left the lab one day and he put his bag filled with his studies, the results of his years of study there at MIT, at least 2 years of PhD studies and results and test results. One side of the car, he walked around to the other side, and we looked at the beautiful outline, the skyline of the Boston, and the Charles River was in between, and it just looked beautiful. Well, he opened the door for me to get in the car and walked around to the other side. His bag with all of his research was gone. And can you imagine how one would feel if your years of work is now gone, stolen? We didn't see anyone. We didn't see anywhere it was. He went back and checked, couldn't find it. what was impressive was the way he solved it. And that was not by screaming or yelling or cursing or being that upset, but sat in the car and thought about it. And when I looked at him, I said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, let me think a while. Let me think a while. And so by the time we reached our destination, he had thought about it and said, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. I have papers in my desk home. I have papers back in the lab. My professor has some. And I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to still graduate. I'm going to rerun those tests, and I'm going to graduate on time. And so with that challenge, that's what he did. He worked hard, long hours, and indeed did what he sought to do. Indeed reached his goal. He graduated on time, and not only on time, but even with better results than he had started. So I thought that was a wonderful person. In my mind, that's really what I wanted to see and wanted to be with, someone like that could solve in that type of person and then that kind of way. So I would like to just kind of start ending here, but end with a note of not only solving things, thinking that through without having problems like that, and being a well-rounded person, but also one who thought about other people, who thought about reaching back to the community and helping, and not only a person that had a physics degree and a PhD in physics, but also thought of his fellow man. And that's something else he would probably like for you to remember. And not to give up in face of adversity, just to be, continue on and be, get past your obstacles. And when he came home from working, we left from Massachusetts area, said there's got to be another place we can live that's a little warmer and easier to get around. And that's what we did. And we went to California, and he worked at Hughes Research Labs there. And came home one day. That's what it was. He came home one day and said, yeah, this was in my mailbox. And he said, it's an application to become an astronaut. What do you think? And I said, oh, well, I think that's great. Why not? Why not you? You've worked hard. You've worked to earn your degrees. You have done what you can do. You've gotten respect from people. Why not? Go ahead and try it. I think you can do it. I believe you can. And so he said, you know, I will. I'll fill this out. And so he did. And we waited and waited and we waited. And well, finally the call came, but near the end, they had already announced so many people. Near the end, he said, the phone rang, he answered and said, oh my, I could tell something was exciting. And he let when I heard him say, yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can do that. Yes, I can. And so he hung up and said, yes. He said that was NASA, and that was the person that's letting me know that I had been selected at least to come and as a candidate. So so off we were. Lots of people celebrating, which was so nice of them, and glad that we were at least selected as a candidate. And we went there to NASA and met wonderful people, and began his journey. first with Fred Gregory and Guion Bluford, and we were the first three, and then Charlie Bolden was another class that came right, I think it was right after ours, and those were I'm speaking of the astronauts of color, of Black astronauts. During that time period, of course, there's just a few of us, but we were close, and that we talked with each other, had good conversation, had good time, and we, as a spouse, it was an interesting time period where you knew your husband was going to be very occupied, and he was, and so many flights that he had to fly a T-38 jet. That's a jet, and get used to that, flying at speeds at that level, etc. And I was raising two children, and but that was something that was what I had to do. And and so as we progressed on, and his flight was announced, again, a wonderful time. We were so happy to have that. Ron went up once before the Challenger, and interestingly enough, it was another Challenger mission. But Ron went up into space and then described how beautiful space was. He also was a mission specialist who operated the payload bay, the experiments in the payload bay, and deployed a couple of satellites. But he also wrote how beautiful the Earth looked from space, as he thought the Lord wanted it to be. And he said it appeared as a beautiful oasis, that it did not have divisions of people, of countries, but was a beautiful oasis, shining brightly, and much as he thought the Lord would like us to live. And so that was another message, to live together. And he had brought his saxophone on that mission as well, to send another message to people on Earth. And that saxophone, with it, he had certain songs he wanted to sing. He wanted to play, rather, with the saxophone, and a message that he could convey back to Earth. And that message was that one song that he played was America the Beautiful, that America had many problems, but was nevertheless still a great nation. That how do we solve some of the malice in the world? And that was by, the next song he sang was What the World Needs Now. And and that is love. That's to be able to work with each other, love each other, be able to work together, and kindness. And so, and the other last part was, what can we do about that? How can we do this? And that was to reach out and touch somebody's hand and make the world a better place.
That was an awesome story, Mrs. Mcnair. I appreciate you telling your story about not only your husband, but yourself as well as a technical writer. You're welcome. Thank you for speaking today as well. Next, we have Ed Dwight.
I want to thank you for including me in this really kind of historic kind of approach to STEM. This is great. I'm especially excited to be on with two of my, these guys are my heroes, and let me put it to you that way. And both of us have a connection of sorts. Colonel Bluford and I have this strange connection of his aunt. His aunt was an incredible librarian and a writer and everything. And I was selected to do a sculpture of her at the opening of her library. And so he and I have that kind of connection. And General Bolden, I mean, this guy here is what it was one of my biggest supporters from the very, very, very beginning. I was a generation older than both of these guys, to tell you the truth. But Charlie Bolden stepped up to the plate. And this was a long time after I'd gotten out of the military. But he included me in his confirmation to be the head of NASA, and he had me come in to Washington and sit with his family, and introduced me to the Senate by telling them that I was one of the reasons that he decided to become an astronaut. And then he hosted a big affair over at Senator Bill Nelson, who was an astronaut also, over in his office. So anyway, Charlie and I, he owns my sculptures. He bought several of my books. So Charlie and I are closer than close. About my background, I guess I consider myself one of the luckiest little kids in the world, because I had what I call a maestro mother. This woman had a huge, incredible plans for me. I was really, really small when I was a kid, but she sensed that I wasn't going to be a very big person. So she decided to set on a journey to develop what was between my ears. So I actually started school at 2 years old, and I've been going to school. I've been to 9 different colleges. I've been going to school ever since. But even in preschool, they noted that I had I had a proclivity for making images, and so she noted that, and so she had me in every craft class and painting class and everything you can possibly imagine, mainly to coordinate my brain, the hand coordination, and some of that also was stimulated by my grandfather. I lived on a farm out in the country, and we grew our own food and killed our own meat and all that kind of stuff. And my grandfather was a junk man, and he's the guy that got me interested in metals. He could weld and make. He could just make anything. But he did all the construction of all the tools and stuff on the farm, and I was kind of his right hand man. The other thing that influenced me was this farmlet, I call it, where we live, was in walking distance of the Fairfax Airport. And so my mother took me down to there. We went down there just about every day, her and my older sister. And so I spent a lot of time down there from the time I was 2, studying airplanes and being around airplanes. And after a while, by the time I'm 4 and 5, I was going down there every day, and I became the mascot of all the white pilots. There was no war at the time, so all the flying was done going hunting. People from Kansas and Missouri and Nebraska, I guess, flying to Colorado and Wyoming and shooting game and bringing it back. And I was hired to clean the airplanes, and I got paid money. And there's a little toddler. And by the time I was 9 and 10, I told him I didn't want any money. I wanted to fly. So I never got a chance to get at the wheel, but here I was flying around with these guys taking me up for rides. And I spent a great deal of time in the mechanics area, handing the guys all the tools and stuff. And that stimulated my interest in flying, because I was very curious about where these guys had been when they came to land there, and where were they going when they took off. And that was kind of stuck in my head. But anyway, like I say, I started school at 2. She got me a library card when I was 4. So I got fascinated with the library, and I was on the road since I was a class artist in the kindergarten. I was a class artist at elementary school, and I was a school artist in high school. And I opened a sign shop when I was 14, and I had all the businesses in Kansas City, especially the Black businesses. I did all their graphic arts for them. And then for the white community downtown, I did all the sales stuff on the windows when they were having sales. And I bought my first car at 14 years old with my art money. So I was destined in my brain to be an artist. I did my first oil painting at 8 years old. And so I was headlong. And in high school, I just took art, pretty much art, all the way through. I took some math and art primarily in high school. I never took any physics or chemistry. But I had won the first 3 paintings in the Kansas State high school art competitions. And with that, we were Catholic, and I went to Catholic white school, white schools all the way through. I only had one black teacher in my life in kindergarten. And so anyway, the nuns took 3 of these paintings, and I won the first 3 places in this competition, and they got me a scholarship to the Kansas City Art Institute. So that was my calling, and that's what I was going to do with my life until, well, Mom had kept me busy. She got me 2 paper routes when I was 9 because she said I was sitting around being too busy on other things. So she said, you got to bring some money in here, kind of in a joking way. So I got 2 jobs. I got a throwing the paper for the black community, the call paper, and the other paper was for the white community, the Kansas. And on one of my picked up my papers or thrown my papers on to the black community, and on the cover of this newspaper was a black pilot standing on the wing of an F-86 Sabre jet. He had got shot down in Korea. And with my fascination with this flying thing that I never visualized myself as flying airplanes. I'll say that right now. I mean, that just wasn't on my bucket list. And but I saw this black pilot, and it was from my hometown, Kansas City, and it was a little short guy like me. So I saw that and immediately ran down to recruiting and told him I wanted to go to pilot training. And the recruiter threw me out of the office because it's, first of all, you're too short and you stutter, which was true. So I wrote the Pentagon directly, and they sent a team out to this little college I was going to. Now, my father had set me down earlier and said, asked me what I was going to do. And I naturally told him that I was going to be an artist. And he said, no, you're not. You're going to engineering school. And I asked him what engineers did, and he said, they make money. That's all you need to know. And so I was going to ace him out by studying architectural engineering. So I enrolled in engineering school, but as an architectural engineering, because as an architect, I could draw. And that was my objective until I saw that black pilot above the fold on the black newspaper, and that did it. Another really strange thing happens that any student, it's called preparation. You don't know what to prepare for. The World War II started when I was 8 years old, and like I said, I've been going to the library because Mom, but I was checking out art books, the great painters and stuff, and the Renaissance painters, and I was studying all that. But there was a 7-volume course in the library, at the same one that the Army Air Corps used to train pilots. And I had been taking that thing home since I was about 10, 11 years. I almost had it permanently checked out. And I had read every chapter in every one of those books. And I would check myself at the end of every chapter. I would go through the questions. Not thinking, I just put this in my back pocket, not thinking that I would ever fly an airplane. But it turns out that when I saw that pilot on that paper, I wrote the Pentagon, and they sent me to Denver, Colorado to test for pilot training. I got into the test. It was a 2.5-hour test. And when I started looking at the test and the answers of the test, it was exactly the same test at the end of each one of these chapters in these manuals that I had been studying for all those years. And I finished the test in about 20 minutes. And the guy asked me, was the test too tough for me? I said, no, I think I might have missed one or two. Well, the Air Force glommed onto me and called my mom and called my colleague, little colleagues there, and declared me a genius. But what they didn't have anything about me being a genius. It had to do with me preparing, and unwittingly preparing for a future. Anyway, I went into the military. To shorten this up a little bit, I joined the military, but I didn't know anything about military protocols, practices. So rather than waiting for my pilot training class, I volunteered to go in as an enlisted man so I could understand how marching was and discipline was and all that sort of thing. I did very, very, very well. I went into pilot training. I graduated at the, pretty much at the top of my class. And I was a class officer all the way through. And graduated from pilot training, I was in the top 5% of my graduating class. So as a result of that, I got offered, I got an offer to be in the first class for the Air Force Academy, which was going to be held at Lowry Air Force Base. And I thought about it. It was 2 weeks before I was to get my wings. And I would have had to give up my wings and all that training in time. I'm talking in a time frame, because they would set me back some years for my ultimate retirement. So I ended up turning that opportunity down to be in the first class of the Air Force Academy. But anyway, I went on to really kind of an illustrious career, because I was one of these can-do kind of young people that I was very strident, and I had, and thanks to Mom, who planted this incredible work ethic and this curiosity ethic, and she had a philosophy, if there's something wrong with it, fix it. And so I did that all of my career, and as a result of that, I got promoted early. They put me on fast track and all that, and I was flying. I was, by then, in the beginning, I was a flight instructor, and I learned a lot. You learn more from instructing people than you do from books or anything else. Because you're sitting there watching out for mistakes and stuff, so you get quite a bit of a flying experience. That was my first duty station. I went to Japan, became the assistant to the commander of the base, and I flew more different airplanes over there, the B-57. I left there and went to Travis Air Force Base, and I was on the wing staff at Travis Air Force Base, and I was flying 5 different airplanes. And I started working, I finished my degree in aeronautical engineering, and I started, that the Air Force paid for, by the way. And I attended college the whole time I was in the Air Force. I was working on my bachelor's. I graduated cum laude at Arizona State in aeronautical engineering. Then I started working on my master's. By the time I got to Travis, I went to Cal Berkeley and was working on a master's in nuclear physics. And then I got this letter from the Pentagon saying, under the direction of the president, we're offering you an opportunity to go to experimental test pilot school in preparation for being the first Negro astronaut. And I thought that was the craziest thing in the world. I hadn't, they had announced the first 7, and I immediately declared these guys nuts. Who in the world would want to do that? And so that was the last thing that I was thinking about doing. And so I went to all of my commanders, and since they had promoted me early, put me on fast track. I was getting all these enormously high ratings as an officer. And I asked them, what did I do? And all of them advised me to do nothing, just stay away from it. Because they had lots of words for those guys in research and development. They're all nuts, and it's totally political, and you're not going to be able to break into that club. And you're black, and you're probably 20 years before this should really be happening. And they told me all of these things that I was not going to be able to do if I opted to go do that. But my mother came to joined in and jumped in. So you're going to do that because it'll help the race. I mean, she interjected this race thing, and I was going to help the race, the progress of the race by being this astronaut guy. And anyway, I sent my stuff in, and lo and behold, the Air Force doesn't answer things in days. They answer things like that in weeks or months. But 4 days after I submitted my application and on my credentials, and they needed 4 things. You had to be under 30 years old. I was 27. You had to have an engineering degree or a degree in natural science, and I had an aeronautical engineering degree. You had to have 1,500 hours of jet time, and I had 2,500 hours of jet time. And the last requirement was if you were a military officer, the last 3 effectiveness reports you get had to be rated outstanding, and my last 4 were rated outstanding. So anyway, I got this letter asking me if I wanted to do this, and thanks to my mother, I said yes. And having no idea that it was, I thought this thing was going to be a nice scientific exercise, and I was going to be in the mix with all these things. But everything that I was warned about from my higher ranking officers that I was working for at the time all came true, because they set this thing up in such a way that I was being crammed down their throats. And they use kind of not so good language to tell the other students in the test pilot school that I was being crammed down their throats. I was a Kennedy guy, and so the best thing they could do was to not speak to me, not talk to me, not drink with me, not socialize with me. And within 6 months, I would be gone. I would self-destruct and just walk away and quit. And of course, they didn't know that I was the Energizer Bunny, and because all that kind of stuff didn't happen. But what was interesting about the whole thing was that I was being handled out of the West Wing of the White House. Nobody else there was, and I ended up graduating, out of test pilot school when they did give us grades. Then I graduated 7th out of 17, and I was being told all the time I was down there that I was not worthy to be there, that I shouldn't be there, that there wasn't the lowest ranking white person in the world was higher than any black, and I was told those kinds of things during my training there. And this was going on weekly. It wasn't something that happened where you can record incidents that were spaced out. This was happening every day. But I fought it, and but what made me so confident and arrogant about it was the fact that I was pretty much talking to somebody in and out of the West Wing of the White House every other day. And so that gave me, the strength to keep on doing this. But I graduated from test pilot school, and then the next thing was to get trying to get a NASA assignment, because there were several people in my class that were chosen for NASA, and everything was fine until November the 22nd, 1963, when President Kennedy was assassinated. And so now, from the political point of view, during this period of time, there was a whole lot of things happening. They had me on speaking tours while I was at test pilot school. I would go to school from Monday till Thursday, and then go on speaking tours from Thursday till Sunday. And I'd get back to the base, back to Edwards, but by Monday afternoon to start classes, which they had already started, obviously. And I would miss the classes on Thursday. And so the white guys got kind of, naturally, they'd be upset about this. What this guy's running around making all these speeches. I made about 2,000 speeches while I was doing all this whole period of time that I was in test pilot school, and trying to make speeches. Because what I didn't know, that there was a deal that was made, and I have to say this because this is critically important. I thought this thing was a scientific exercise, but it turns out that was President Kennedy didn't know any black people pretty much. I mean, he wasn't in the movement. He was afraid of Dr. King, but he needed the black vote. And as a result of that, he supposedly, and this is the way the story was related to me, he called Harry Belafonte to ask him for the black vote. Could he deliver the black vote for him? And Harry says, no, I can deliver people to you who can deliver. So there was 4 or 5 of them: Dr. King, Roy Wilkins, Ethel Randolph, Whitney Young, and I forget the other gent's name. So they met with Senator Kennedy at the time, and everybody gave their spiel. And Whitney Young told Senator, he says, Senator, we cannot get our kids in the colleges. We have no engineers, we have no scientists, and we can't get our kids into the white colleges, white engineering schools. Because if they graduated from a black school with an A average, they immediately downgraded to a C. But we got 4 military academies where I can funnel these black kids into the military academies. Once you graduate from a military academy, these white colleges cannot turn them down for graduate degrees. And so that was the motivation. So Kennedy asked him, how are you going to do this? And so Whitney tells him, make me a black astronaut, and I will deliver all of these kids in these black colleges. But you got to make me a black astronaut and give him to me. And that's what happened. That's why I was running around the country, and they brought me to Washington. I met all the senators, and this was a political end, so that they would not get any resistance to my being, nominated, because they were worried about the tax base. And what I mean by that, if you brought a black or a woman into NASA too soon, if a black could do it or a woman could do it, then these 7 guys they hired were not heroes. And so as a result of that, they were worried about bringing a black into that program too soon. But anyway, make a long story short, the president was killed. Actually, the president was a little nervous about this whole project, so he assigned it to Bobby Kennedy. So he was Attorney General, of course, and so Bobby was the one that orchestrated my coming into the program. And orchestrated me, getting political acceptance with the senators and the House of Representatives. So I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. meeting with the senators and congressmen, and which no other astronaut that's ever been in the United States ever done anything like that. So when Kennedy died, President Johnson, I was called in and say, you understand that, the president's going to need his own black astronaut. So what we'd like you to do is stand down. You're going into space, Captain Dwight. So, but what the president wants is for you to help him select your replacement. And if all that stuff sounds off the wall and crazy, it is not. It really actually happened. So as a result of that, Robert Lawrence, and I told him he had to have a PhD because all the other guys that were in my classes had bachelor's degrees in engineering. A couple of them had masters, but I got criticized all through the whole thing because I was undereducated. And I gave him a lot of other advice that they didn't follow, but they made sure Bob Lawrence had a PhD. So they asked me to stand down for 3 years is what they asked me to do. And to go anywhere in the world. They offered me a deal, I could go anywhere in the world, and they send me a check every month until Bob got trained. Bob Lawrence, I'm talking about, and he was the highest ranking guy. They were talking about my rank I was a captain, but Bob was the only one in his class that was a major. All the rest of the guys were captains, but he had a PhD. They didn't. He was a major. They didn't, and that was the president followed my recommendations on what my replacement should be. And of course, Bob later got killed, of course. And there are a lot of, there was a lot of crazy talk about how they killed him and everything. But the kind of stuff we were doing in test pilot school, I mean, there was a lot of risk involved, and this whole idea of this test pilot stuff, was high risk. Within 3 years of my graduating from test pilot school, there were only 7 out of that 17 I told you. There was only 7 of us left. All the rest of the guys had gotten killed one way or another. So I'm lucky that I'm still alive and well. So I left the military, moved to Denver, was besieged with this new attachment to my name. And reason I left, and this is critically important, to understand the politics of the military. I told you about the meeting at the White House where I was told to go away. Well, they didn't leave that alone because I was still making speeches. Part of the deal was no more speeches. And of course, I was in demand for, people wanted to know. And so I was still making speeches. So part of my deal was I wasn't to make any more speeches. But I picked a base in Holloman. They told me to go someplace that was quiet. It's no newspapers, no reporters, no nothing. I was supposed to disappear off the face of the earth. And the next thing you know, these guys sent a team out there with an assignment to kill me. And I'm going, what? These guys have really gotten so once I got the details of what this thing was about, I immediately resigned. I said, I'm not going to stay around for you guys to kill me. So I immediately resigned. So they said, okay, if he resigns, he goes to jail for 21. We're going to bring charges against him. And he's going to be in jail for 21 years. That's the term. And what I was being charged with is that I met with senators without permission. I met with presidents without permission. I met with House representatives without permission, because there's a military law that says you can't go around meeting people in Congress and senators, without going through the military chain of command. Now, mind you, I was meeting with all these people at their insistence. They were demanding that I be there. They were demanding that I go meet with these senators, which I did. And so in reality, if I had done that on my own, which was crazy, the whole notion was crazy that I would do something like that on my own. But anyway, Bobby Kennedy intervened, and so we cut a deal that I would leave the military. They had me leaving the military in disgrace. And what I mean by being in disgrace, they stripped me of wanted to strip me of my ability to vote. I was never to enter a government building the rest of my life. And it was a whole string of things that they added to this deal that we were supposed to do. And of course, Bobby Kennedy went in and got all that stuff changed. And so I ended up, and they wanted to give me a dishonorable discharge. That was the other part of it. And I don't know what I had done to get that, but anyway, I went into civilian life and went to work for the IBM Corporation. And as a matter of fact, I brought some of NASA's programs into the Front Range here in Colorado and became a kind of a star at IBM Corporation. They were promoting me to be the first Black vice president of IBM, and I didn't want to do that because I've already gone through this first Black episode before, and I'm not going to be the first Black in private industry, so we can forget that. So anyway, I left IBM, became a businessman, and later. I had one of the larger construction companies. I had 5 companies immediately after I got out of the military, because people were, this name thing, astronaut, was seemed to be permanently attached to my name. So as a result of that caused a lot of stuff to happen, and the white business community came into play, and whatever I wanted here I pretty much got because I was just astronaut guy. But anyway, I had one of the larger construction companies here in Denver built the city of Parker, Colorado, and as well as condominiums all over the metropolitan area, apartments, condominiums, you name it. And I bought a big house, and I was making a lot of art out of the leftover metal of my construction sites. And the first Black lieutenant governor of Colorado here was at my house and saw this art that I had made and asked me if I would make a sculpture of him. They wanted a sculpture of him for the as the first Black vice governor here in Colorado. And I told George, I said, I don't model, I weld things together, okay, like my grandfather used to do. And he says, you're going to do this because you're going to be one of the greatest sculptors that ever lived when I get through with you. And I kind of laughed at him. And he introduced me to being Black. And I was 42 years old at the time this was beginning to happen. And he said the Black community is not recognized anywhere in America. Blacks have been on the continent for 300 and some years, but you can't go to a museum, you can't go to a public square, you can't go to a park, can't even go to a gallery to see any Black images of Black people. And of course, I told him, I went to white schools all the way through. I'd say, well, who cares? And he leaped into me and asked me, I said, what did Black people do was the question I asked George. And he says, well, they built this country. And he said, have you heard of Harry Tubman? I said, no. I was 42. Frederick Douglass, no. Nat Turner, no. George Washington Carver, no. I went down the list. I didn't know anybody. And so I was, he got me a stack of books and forced me to read them. And I didn't even know that was slavery. I'm in my 40s. And so I got angry that I was robbed of all of this history. So I stopped what I was doing, sold all these companies, and I went back to college and got a master's degree in sculpture. And then as a matter of fact, I was so effective there, they made me the head of the sculpture department. And I went there to learn. I ran the sculpture department at the University of Denver for 3 years. And then the Park Service saw some art that I had done, and they reached out to me and made me their young art star. And I was traveling all over the country with the Park Service. They commissioned me to do a sculpture of Black history sculpture, Black cowboys and Black Indians, and white Blacks came west. And that started it. And then the Park Service came back to me a couple of years later and asked me to do a series on jazz. So I did a 7 bronze series of jazz that we traveled all over the United States, and all these things kind of opened. I was doing these huge memorials for unknown stories of what Black people did in America. Once I found out that there were stories and the real struggle and what was it about. So I've done 130 memorials and public art pieces around the country since I started. And so anyway, that's the kind of a rough thing. I went too long probably, but there's a lot of lessons in there about not, all the plans that you have for your life and how they can be interrupted, and how to give an example. I wanted to be this artist guy and end up being this pilot guy, and then I wanted to be this pilot guy and ended up being back at this artist guy. So you got to keep your options open about all these matters, but I'm an inveterate reader. I must own 25, 30,000 books because everything that I've ever done, even in the military, I read the background and the history of what was going on so that if there was something wrong, I was able to fix it. And then that just became a part of my personality and a part of my toolkit that I walked around with. And, somebody told me something once of find something your boss doesn't like to do or doesn't have time to do and do it for him. and you'll become a hero big time. And I practiced that all the way through my career. And for those reasons, I was mildly successful. And as the president hadn't gotten killed, I'm certain that I would have gone up in space. But there was a working deal at the time that this is 20 years too soon. And it turned out to be that I graduated from test pilot school 20 years, almost to the month, when the Guion Bluford went up in space. So anyway, I'll shut my face now and thank you. And I hope this gets to the kids, that there's some lessons in that you got to be resilient and don't give up.
Well, Mr. Dwight, first of all, I am just in awe at your story. I'm going to turn on my video and let's see. Yep, we get side by side here. Your story is so amazing. Oh my goodness. It is just wonderful. It is so amazing. Just a couple of points that I wrote down. First of all, I thank God for your mom, because she pushed you. She didn't allow you to say no. She didn't allow you to say, I don't think so, or maybe not. She encouraged you to step forward. And I can tell that has been ingrained in you ever since she started doing that years ago.
For the new young mothers, I have to add one more thing. From the time that I could walk, I was the only boy, and I had 4 sisters. From the time that I could walk, no matter what went on during the day, my mother walked into my little alcove. Wasn't a real bedroom, it was an alcove, because I had my own, because the girls had, and she'd walk in there and she would rub my head for some crazy reason. And she would tell me, we would say a prayer and everything, but she would tell me anything that happened that day. Like my dad would come in and say something really, dastardly about white people, and she would say, don't forget that. And what she would do, she would rub my head and she would tell me that she loved me and that I was the most incredible person in the entire world. And don't let anybody tell me that I'm not the most incredible person. And that happened for 18 years now, okay? 18 whole years, every night.
Yes. That was instilling in you that level of self-confidence that you obviously built your next steps on. You were the first in so many ways. And not only just the first, but the first with controversy, the first with, I don't want you here. And as you shared your story, those around you did not hold their words with expressing to you and telling you, I don't want you here. But yet you persisted.
Well, that's easy. Dad told me a story, and my dad was a professional baseball player at one time, and they traveled around the United States playing ball with little white teams, and so my dad was in Iowa, and they had a newspaper that said when the black team came to town, they had headlines: "Nigger team come to town this weekend." All the farmers saved up their tomatoes and rotten eggs, and when the black players got off the bus, they would be pelted with these rotten eggs and tomatoes. When my dad and them would beat the devil out of the local team, these same people were standing in line asking for autographs. And that lesson to me was, and he was telling me this lesson that had 100% to do with what white people, the only thing white people respect is excellence. And if they're challenged, they can either get mad because you know that, or you know of that, or you can do that, or they give in one way or the other. Okay, and that's something for the kids to understand. This whole process of excellence, and not being bothered with what these guys were saying. I had a mission, and my mission was getting through that test pilot school, and it didn't have a dang thing to do with what these guys said to me.
Your mission was on being the best that you could be. being the excellent Mr. Ed Dwight. And that's what brought you through so successfully. Let me ask you a question as far as being the only one, because you were introduced, as you mentioned, in your undergrad, in your K through 12 school that you went to. Ever since you went to school, you went to a majority white school. So you were introduced to that environment at a very young age. Needless to say, let's fast forward when you decided to major in aeronautical engineering. What year was that again, Mr. Dwight?
1951.
In 1951. So in 1951, we did not have that many people of color majoring in aeronautical engineering. So you shared the story as far as seeing the magazine and seeing the Black pilot on the magazine, which had a lot of inspiration for you as well, when you were like, oh yeah, before then you weren't thinking of flying. After then, yes, that was number one on your goal. Can you share with the young people, with adults as well, how important it is to set your own goals, no matter what those around you may say you can do or cannot do? You talked about focusing on excellence as well. How important is it for individuals set your own goals, raise your own bar to move forward?
Well, this is where role modeling comes in, and we can sit down and have our dreams and have dreams of things that we would like to do, and sometimes the dreams are unreachable or seemingly unreachable. But the thing that triggered that whole thing off, if I had made up my mind while I was hanging around with these pilots and stuff at the airport, and there was so much a part of my life, there was only white people there, and in my brain, what is saying? Well, this is something reserved for them, since and if I wanted to do this, the mountain would be too high to climb, and I didn't know who to talk to about it. I didn't know where to go about it, and so I had to put that in my back pocket. Being an artist, that part of it. It didn't seem to me, because I wasn't around a lot of white artists, and so that would set me back, saying only white guys can do that. But I did. But once I saw that black Dayton Ragland on that set, standing on that airplane, and I was a little short guy, and he was a little short guy, just like me, and I said to myself, "Oh my God," and of course that crystallized it for me. And that's not to say that well, I doubt seriously that I would have made that move to go to pilot training had I not seen that image. I'm sorry, I would not have done that. I would continue to pursue this architectural drawing thing and to satisfy my dad, get the engineering attached to it, but designing buildings and designing things and stuff like that, because I was a damn good artist when I was a kid. So, but I could master that, and nobody could take that away from me. I mean, I had acceptance there. Everybody they didn't know that I was black. When they submitted those paintings to the schools out there, they gave me the first three ribbons in Kansas, which was, there was only one black school in the state of Kansas at that time. So so it was really fascinating to watch that whole political thing operate. And I, about the racial thing, there was I don't call it conflict. My mother looked like she was white. As a matter of fact, most of her family passed for white. And everywhere she took me, like we went to the library to get a library card, and the white librarian asked her, "What are you doing with that little boy? Are you babysitting him?" That's our white mom, so no, that's my son, And of course, the white libraries wouldn't give me a card anyway. She was there trying to get me a library card, so we had to end up going to a black school that had a good library there in Kansas City to get all these things. That's why I was shocked to see in that black school they had of 7 manuals on how to fly airplanes in that black school's library. How did it get there? I don't know, some kind of destiny. And I kept it almost checked out for the whole time because nobody else wanted to read those things. So there was literally my set of 7 things that I was curious about, that I wanted to know about, because it included weather, it included science, it included technology, it included the science of flying, and engineering, how airplanes are built, how airplanes fly, and all that sort of thing. And I had put that in my back pocket, just in case. It was a kind of just in case.
Well, Mr. Dwight, you said one word that you mentioned at the beginning of your talk, curiosity. And curiosity for you started at a very young age, and you continued moving with curiosity throughout your career, even after retirement, and moving on to develop sculptures that are now shown across the world, and there forever for history. Can you give us just a little statement, your view on how important is it for individuals, especially when they're desiring to develop their career paths in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, or whatever it is that they want to do? How important is it to hold on to that curious element and move with it? Always be curious.
Well, I wrote a book, and every book I sign, right on the bottom, I write, stay curious. Because in talking, because I talk to a lot of little bitty kids as well as college kids, and this whole idea of staying curious, because everybody that I've ever met, when I was doing my jazz series, I was traveling with Dizzy and Miles and all the big giants of jazz, and I thought that, well, these guys are just about music. I mean, ain't about nothing else, These guys are the most curious people I've ever met in my life. They travel all over the world, giving concerts, and they're out doing things and talking to engineers and talking to people who admire their music, and it's just unbelievable. Their curiosity, and you say, well, these guys just play music, so what? And it's not that at all. The reason that they're in the top of their game in music has directly to do with their curiosity. About them being curious about other things. They're curious about money. They're curious about other people. They're curious about marketing. They're curious about movements, if you will, about how, what is this whole racial thing all about? And that's why they get so involved in these things, because they're curious, and they can stage it themselves and say, screw you up, I'm making all my money. So you have to stay curious and keep open-minded about every single thing that comes down your path, everything. And if some speaker comes and you say, well, I'm not interested in that, I'm telling you, be interested in it, no matter what they're talking about. And the STEM thing is I must tell you, is critical to my success as an artist. Had I not taken math, and I had to fill in because I didn't take a lot of that in high school. So my whole college, I was carrying 18 hours a quarter, a semester, because I had to fill in physics and chemistry and biology and math and advanced math and differential equations and calculus and all of these. But I had to fill all in. But thank God I was curious enough to do that and get a handle on it. But since I become a sculptor, it's why I'm even partially successful, because I have a STEM background. That's the only reason, because I bring these young artists in, and it's troubling, believe me, to have these young artists who graduate from these art schools that know nothing about math and science. And what I've had these kids ask me, what's 10%? What does that mean? I ain't never heard that before.
Wow. Yes.
So anyway, that's so STEM has caused me to be a successful artist.
I want to comment on one more thing, and then I'll let you go. I tell you, I don't want to let you go because your history is so much packed with golden nuggets to help anybody out to be successful. Oh my goodness. But there's something else that you said as you were describing yourself, and I'm going to switch to the importance of being a leader and being willing to stand forward, even when you may be surrounded by individuals who don't think you deserve where you are, but to stand firm and very confident in leading. You mentioned several times describing yourself as having a can-do attitude, and that was recognized by whomever you were working under, your managers, your leadership. They always recognize that, moving you forward, because again, that's your focusing on excellence again, right? But having that can-do attitude is what kept bumping you forward to the next, to the next, to the next. So can you just share with us again the importance of having that can do? Somebody else is not doing it, I can do it. Someone's doing it, I can do it better. So what's the importance of having that can do attitude for a person to be successful in their growth?
Okay, that has a real easy answer, and the easy answer is no matter what you're doing, I don't care what profession you're in, there's a knowledge base for that profession. And if you just wait for people to bring energy to you or education to you or experience to you, you're not going to be successful. So if you're in the world of business, if you don't give an example, what I would do when I was studying philosophy, I went to the library and I went to the library and I said, I need the 5 top philosophers. I need a book. Give me names of the top, and I did it with everything that I've ever done. And so there's a right way to do everything. And so if you don't wait for people to shower you with knowledge, you go digging around yourself and figuring out, who are the guys that really did this really, really well. And so I got 5 books on them and I read them. Each of them, ironically, each of them came to the same conclusion, but they attacked it in different ways. Each person attacked the problem in a different way, but they all ended up with the same conclusion. And that's what I've done, whether it's math, whether it's art, whether it's marketing, no matter what it is, I sit down and I figure out who are the top folks and what kind of books that they write and where can I find them and go to bed with them, whether it's magazines or Black Enterprise magazine in some instances and all the other top-notch magazines in business and art marketing and stuff. And I had to read those things and see what trends were, what's required for success, and rather than waiting on somebody to tell you what's. And so when you go into these things, you already got a handle on the right way, how somebody else did it, because they're free to give you all this free information about how to do things right. And so in every instance, that's what I did. Whether I was in SAC and I was managing SAC command was different from their tactical command, and what was their mission, and how did these guys do? What kind of people they need to run an organization like that? And so as a result, that's what I did. I mean, like I said, I'm a reader, and that came first. And to find out what is the framework that these people should be working with. What is that framework? And if you know that, you can contribute.
Be prepared. Read.
Yes.
Right. Well, I have the joy, Mr. Edward Dwight, I will call you scientist, entrepreneur, artist, astronaut, Mr. Yes, I Can, Mr. Curiosity as well, that will lift you to the next level. I have the honor, I would say, of living in Denver and seeing one of your main sculptures that you put in the city park of Dr. Martin Luther King, which is just marvelous, just as wonderful. And needless to say, your artwork will live on and on and on. There's another person that I want to just give a shout out to for thank you. And I may not get my notes. It was the individual Yeah. The vice governor, I believe, was the one who said, no, you're going to be known for your sculptures. That was him, right?
Yeah.
I say thank you to him because he pushed you to the next level. And he was so right, because you have opened the door to several people in all different areas. And what I love as well is your work will live on and on and on for the world to continue to see. And I don't know if you have thought about it, but just think of all the number of individuals, the young engineers, the young entrepreneurs to be, the young scientists, the young artists who you have inspired from just standing firm, moving forward, and continuing with your yes, I can, that your mom instilled in you as well, attitude. It's just wonderful. It's just awesome. So I say thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome, and keep doing your good work. By the way, you're really good at what you do. So keep doing that, please.
Oh, I will. So I'm going to say thank you again for taking out this time and being part of this webinar. Everyone, each one of you guys are STEM legacy pioneers in all of what you do, and you have put the icing on the cake.
Next, we'll have Captain Willie Daniels to speak next.
Wow, I'm deeply honored to be on this panel with such distinguishing guests today. And I'm standing on the shoulders of these giants of the aviation and aerospace industries. And I would like to take a few minutes to tell a little bit of my story on how I became intertwined with these great legends of our nation. I was born in 1955 in Kansas City, Kansas, and my family moved to Palmdale, California, near Edwards Air Force Base in 1957, a year before NASA was formed in 1958. And shortly after that, NASA selected the first 7 astronauts, the Mercury 7 astronauts, who were stationed out at Edwards Air Force Base. Amongst them were the first 3 astronauts, Alan Shepard, who became the first to fly in space on May 15th, 1961, and Gus Grissom, who flew on July 21st, 1961, and then John Glenn, who flew in February of 1962. And I have a story after we moved to Pomona, California from the Palmdale area, and I would ask my mother, because I heard about the launch of John Glenn, which was going to be the first orbital flight going all the way around the world. And the first 2 with Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom was pretty much a suborbital flight. They do a parabolic arc, they go up and then they turn around and they come right straight back down. But John Glenn was the first that was going to do a total flight around the world. And I asked my mother, Mom, if I go to bed, I do all my homework and I go to bed early, would you wake me up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning so I could watch that launch into space? And I went to bed extra early that night and she woke me up, and sure enough, in 1962, I was able to watch John Glenn in his historic flight for the first time as an astronaut going completely around the world. Now, living over in the Palmdale area, as a small child, I would go outside and play with my family and friends. And every now and then we would hear a sonic boom going off. And I'd look up into the sky and I could see these contrails as they raced across the skies. But unbeknownst to me, at that time, it was folks like Colonel Chuck Yeager, who was the commander of the astronaut training school, and Captain Ed Dwight, and others out there breaking the sound barrier. Now, as a small child, one of the things that happened to us, I had a lot of brothers and sisters. I had 9 brothers and sisters, and we, as growing up out in the Southern California area, my father would load us all up in his station wagon, and he'd have us count out 1 through 10 to make sure that we were all still there at the same time. but then we'd head off to maybe Edwards Air Force Base or over to Palmdale Airport or Mojave Airport, where he would take us off to air show. And for the first time, this is where I got the love for airplanes. I would see these airplanes flying in the skies, people jumping out of airplanes and the whole works. And this is where I fell in love at the time with wanting to learn how to fly. Now, growing up in the 60s, each year we would return back to Kansas City to visit my grandparents and my other family members. And my grandmother had a photograph of a young man on her living room table posing in his football uniform with a football in his hands. And my grandmother would say to me, "See that young man? He's an astronaut." That young man was Ed Dwight. He was a good friend of my family as they grew up in Kansas City. In 1962, Ed was selected by President John F. Kennedy to become the first African-American astronaut candidate, only to be removed from the program after the Kennedy's assassination in 1963. And Ed can tell you a little bit more about his story when he comes on. But the next candidate to be selected in the program was actually Major Robert Lawrence, who in 1967 was selected. And unfortunately, he passed away in an F-104 starfighter supersonic jet aircraft accident out of Edwards Air Force Base. And as I continued to grow up in the 60s and the 70s, I'm looking for role models, because I would tell my brothers and sisters were always asking me, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be an astronaut. They looked at me and laughed and said that you're not going to be an astronaut, you're going to be an astronaut. And so, because that was the thing that they were talking about, going into space was crazy. And so in 1962, when we moved there to Pomona, California, I attended elementary school, junior high, high school, and attended college at Mount San Antonio College. And I was a commercial pilot major. And in 1976, I transferred from Mount San Antonio College over to Metropolitan State College in Denver, and where I became a professional pilot major. And one of my courses, I had an instructor. And this was back in 1977 by this time at Metro. And my instructor had announced that he had a special guest that he had invited to speak at our class the following week. And it turned out the two of these individuals had been test pilots together out of test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. And this guest speaker turned out to be Mr. Ed Dwight. And after his visit and speech to my class, I introduced myself to Mr. Dwight and told him that he didn't know me, but he knew my family because he grew up with them in Kansas City. And I told him that I was very interested in becoming an astronaut. And he invited me to his home, and he gave me an application to apply for an astronaut position with NASA. And shortly after that, submitting my application, I received a rejection letter from NASA. Unlike with Ron, I received this rejection letter, and it was pretty devastating to me. There was a certain criteria that one needed to have. First of all, you needed to have graduated from college. I was still enrolled in college. And you had to have some type of engineering degree that could be used in the space program that would have been beneficial to working and operating in space. And also one of the big things, it wasn't required, but one of the big things is, had you gone to test pilot school? And I had none of those in my repertoire. I found myself while I was in college on a path to become an airline pilot and not on a path to be an astronaut. And the main reason for that is at the time, there was not a lot of role models out there for me to follow. And shortly after this, unbeknownst to me, or shortly before this, unbeknownst to me, NASA had contracted with an American actress by the name of Miss Nichelle Nichols of Star Trek. And she was also known as Lieutenant Uhura, you know. And Nichelle Uhura, or actually Nichelle Nichols, had worked on the series of Star Trek in the early to mid 60s, and she was considering getting off. And she ran into Dr. Martin Luther King, and she asked Martin Luther King about she was going to leave this program, and he told her that she needed to stay in there. And she said, why? And because she represented African Americans in a television program that basically represented a multinational crew on board the international, on board the Enterprise of Star Trek. And Nichelle went on, NASA had contracted with her to help them recruit the very first class of space shuttle astronauts. And in that class, you had Dr. Guion Bluford, Dr. Ronald Mcnair, and Colonel Fred Gregory, who unfortunately, Fred's on holiday with his family and wasn't able to join us today. And they just recently named a building at the Air Force Academy in his honor, Gregory Hall. And Dr. Bluford, Ron Mcnair, and Colonel Gregory were all in the first class. And the second class was Charlie Bolden, and to be followed by the fifth African-American astronaut was Dr. Mae Jemison, when she was selected. And so, as I mentioned, there was not a lot of role models for me to follow. And so after graduating from Metropolitan State College in 1978, as a professional pilot major, I hired on with United Airlines within a week of my graduation, not as a pilot, but as a flight attendant. And I used this opportunity to get my foot in the door in order to use it as a stepping stone to get into the cockpit for United. And during that time frame, I flew as a flight attendant for about 8 years, and then I transitioned into the cockpit, where I started out on the Boeing 727, and I worked as an instructor for United, as a recruiter for United. I transitioned over to the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. I went to the Boeing 747-400, where I flew that for 19 years out of Los Angeles, pretty much all over the world. And then I transitioned over to the Boeing 777 as a captain. And I have fortunately had an opportunity in a few of my flights. I had General Charlie Bolden on a couple of my flights. One was out of Japan to Los Angeles, and another one was out of Paris, France, back to Washington, D.C. And then ultimately I retired off of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. And this was after 42 years of service with United Airlines. I have recently returned to United Airlines, working on an operations center out of Denver International Airport, helping with the smooth flow of flights coming in and out of Denver. 1980, I joined a group of airline pilots that had formed an organization called ASAP. And ASAP stood for the American Society of Aerospace Pilots. And this group of pilots wanted to see what the feasibility of airline pilots flying transitioning from flying airline jets to flying the space shuttle. And we were being heavily courted by NASA at this point in time. And one of my trips was down to the Johnson Space Center when I had a chance to meet Charles Bolden for the first time at the Johnson Space Center over in Houston. And since then, we have remained in contact with each other over the years, and that's going over 40 years at the present time. In 1999, alongside of other airline pilots and engineers and scientists and educators, I founded an organization called Shades of Blue, which is an aviation aerospace foundation dedicated to helping build the future workforce for the country. And to date, we have worked with thousands and thousands of students to inspire them to pursue careers in the fields of aviation and aerospace. And just to name a few that we have been a part of here recently, one of the young men just spent 6 months on orbit on Expedition 64 of SpaceX, Mr. Victor Glover, who just returned back in May after being up in space on the International Space Station. We have another young lady, Miss Corinne Gatto Stano, and she's now a rocket propulsion engineer working on propulsion. She did the Mars 2020 program, and now she's working on a project to go to Europa, to burrow down into the oceans of Europa to look for life in the oceans of Europa. And I formed this organization because at the time, I found that there was not a lot of role models out there for me to put me on a path to become an astronaut, which was my ultimate goal. But now, after becoming an airline pilot and being in the industry for over 42 years, I know what it takes to become an airline pilot. I know what it takes to become an astronaut. I know what it takes to be an engineer and a scientist. And we are working to help build that future workforce by inspiring these young people in the areas of STEAM and STEAM++, which stand for science, technology, engineering, arts, math. And in 2016, as noted by General Bolden, NASA added the D for design because they want people to think about designing aircraft and designing spacecraft and what it's going to take for us to be able to fly to Mars, send people to Mars, not on a one-way trip, but to bring them back here to the Earth in one piece. And so these are the things that we are doing with my organization to help inspire. And by having these heroes and sheroes, and I thought it was great to have Cheryl tell a little bit about herself as a spouse, because a lot of times we have a tendency to look at the tip of the spear, and the spouses are those individuals behind those astronauts that are going up in space, and they are usually overlooked. And so the roles that they play as wives, as mothers, as supporters of those astronauts is huge. And you know, Cheryl, my hat's off to you for the years that you have worked with Ron and the Dream Foundation on that. It's amazing that you're still going and supporting that. And just to be on this panel with all of you heroes and sheroes, to me, is a huge, wonderful experience for me. And it's something that I hope the young people, the students out there across the world will listen to this opportunity and follow in our footsteps. And thank you all for being here. So thank you for the opportunity to be here on your panel.
Thank you for speaking and sharing your story, Captain Willie.
We're ready for our first question, Mayan.
There was a question for Mrs. Mcnair earlier in the chat, and I was able to capture that question. And the question was from Tahara, and it states, this is her statement: Dr. Mcnair didn't advance alone. He created a support system for many others to follow. How important was his support to the success of others?
Oh, okay. Well, I've heard from other people, from people around the nation, how they have looked up to him and how they have taken in consideration the things that he said. Also, I believe you heard Charlie Bolden, General Joe Bolden, speak of Ron and his encouragement to him. So anyone he met or he saw that he thought would be interested. He would encourage them to go on, go for it, go do what you want to do. But also, there is an organization around the nation and universities around the nation. It's called the Mcnair Scholars. And they, it's at least in 300, I believe 300 universities around the nation. And it was considered actually as his life as a role model, in that the first of a family to achieve a PhD, and the kinds of things that he did with his life, and the success that he had, and the encouragement and the inspiration to, especially to youth. He spoke to youth all over the nation after his first flight, and to encourage them to reach their goals, to encourage them to, again, work past their obstacles. And so with that, and all the universities and colleges, and the students that I meet that are Mcnair Scholars, they all talk so highly and tell me of the things that they wish to do. And in many of them in the STEM fields, and not only in the STEM fields, but actually in various fields, they mention the encouragement and the inspiration that they received in studying him and studying through this program particularly. And so with the schools, there are many schools around the nation that are named after Ron, high schools, elementary, middle schools, etc. Some that I've gone to speak to, and some that have written to me and have talked about Ron's life and what it has meant. And so I can't tell you a number of students, but several of them all over the nation have been influenced from my understanding.
I'll add, Cheryl is, she's not quite as strong as I would say. Ron was not encouraging. Ron embarrassed me. When he asked me, why would you not apply? And I said, they never picked me. He looked at me pretty sternly and he said, that is the dumbest thing I ever heard. He just said it. That is the dumbest thing I ever heard. And what he reminded me was the lessons that my mom and dad had taught me about believing in yourself, never giving up, just being prepared and try anything. Had Ron not done that, I can guarantee you I would not be sitting here today. So he was more than encouraging to me. He embarrassed me, and that's why I applied.
Oh, thank you.
Sometimes you need that encouragement to push you along. It seems everyone has some form of obstacle, and yet you all were able to overcome all of your obstacles that got in your way to where you are today. And so I'm actually in awe. I was trying not to, shed any tears, but it's just nice to hear, successful stories, and the legacy that you all have created and for us all, students, everyone. Just, it's nice to hear these stories live and in living, even though we're not in the same spaces, but live and in living color. It's just amazing to hear your stories. I actually have a question for you all. Do you think you have created a formula or blueprint for success that is sustainable for the ones that come after you? What type of, I know you said you did encounter some obstacles, but how did you overcome those obstacles? And now, where you are today, what is that blueprint for us coming after you?
I'll go ahead and start. It looks like I'm on. I think in my case, goal setting, aiming high, being persistent, and having confidence in yourself. I remember graduating from Penn State. I wondered if I'd ever get back into the aerospace program because I was flying jets and all that sort of stuff. And I knew that I really wanted to be an engineer. And I had a hurdle because I wasn't the greatest student at Penn State. And I remember contacting the Air Force after coming back from Vietnam and saying, hey, I want to be an engineer. And they said, well, you have to have a master's degree and so forth and so on. And I realized I didn't have a master's degree and I was going to be teaching airplanes, teaching people how to fly for 45 years. So I didn't see any way of doing it. But I think in my case, I had a goal. I knew that I had to prepare myself for it. I took 4 or 5 courses at the University of California, Berkeley. And I was prepared to leave the Air Force to try and go to grad school, even though that was still pretty far out in the future. And I felt very honored when, in applying for the program in the Air Force, I got selected. And I realized that I had laid the foundation, the preparation, which is really very important in order to be able to take advantage of opportunities. So I think you'll have to work hard to continue to improve yourself, make you a better person. Always look for better ways of doing things and always preparing yourself for the future, even though you may not know exactly what the future is going to hold. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I got selected. And it was all due to preparation. So setting high goals, constantly working to make yourself a better person and always preparing for future opportunities, I found was the key to my success.
Thank you.
I would like to add something along with that. You know, as I mentioned earlier, we founded my organization, Shades of Blue, with the idea of taking professionals like these heroes and sheroes today from our working environment into the classrooms, which is exactly what we're doing right now today. And you know, being a role model, like I mentioned, there was not a lot of role models at the time. Unfortunately, when I was growing up, Guy Bluford, and I barely knew of Ed Dwight and Charlie Bolden and Fred Gregory and all those guys. I didn't know of them at the time. So there was not an individual that looked like me that I could go to and talk to them and ask them, how do I become an astronaut, or what do I need to do? And so many years later, you know, I decided to found this organization that would be able to help these young people across the nation to follow in our footsteps. And just to give a few quick statistics, in the next 16 to 17 years in our country, in the airline industry, we're facing worldwide shortages of about 804,000 airline pilots, 914,000 flight attendants, and 769,000 aircraft mechanics. And right now today, we're over 2 million engineers short. And so this is a great opportunity for those young people who are interested in pursuing a career in these fields to go down this road and study. Now, every one of the panelists here will tell you it's not going to be an easy task to achieve that. But if you work hard at it, you dedicate yourself to achieving whatever the goals are that you're working at, you ultimately will succeed with those goals. I woke up this morning with a pleasant phone call from my own niece, and she called me up to just tell me that, Uncle, I just wanted to let you know that I have gotten a class date as a pilot for United Airlines. And when you can say, you know, I had 2 individuals in June and July that asked me to come out to United Airlines and present them with their wings as pilots for United Airlines. So those are the types of things that we can see as successes, as role models and mentors for the next generation. And giving them the numbers that I just gave you should be in everybody's ears to say, hey, this might be a great path for me to be on. When I was 22 years old, I walked out of college. It was like someone handed me a set of keys and said, here are your keys to the world. And I've had that opportunity. Guy and Charlie and Ron and Fred and all those other individuals, they traveled around the earth at about 17,500 miles an hour. They were about 17,000 miles an hour faster than me. But when you look at it, we all had an opportunity to travel the world, to see the world. And these are some great opportunities for you to participate in that as well.
Thank you. We have a question from Siam, and the question is, if you can give one piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I just stuck mine in the chat, so I'll let everybody read it to save time.
I would say follow your dreams, no matter what your dreams are. Don't ever stop until you succeed at it.
I would have to say the same thing, never quit. You know, there's always keep trying and be aggressive at the dreams that you have. So, you know, never quit.
Some great advice. And I would say the same thing to my younger self. All right.
I would too. I think that's a great piece of advice. Yeah.
I just want to acknowledge Mr. Dwight. He has to log off at 6:30. So I just want to acknowledge him and thank him for showing up. And hopefully he will come back and do another chat with us.
And Maya, hi, this is Karen. Also recognizing Major General Charlie Bolden, who needs to drop off.
Oh, okay.
If you could too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm sorry. And another question that I have, do any of you have any regrets? Any at all?
I'll jump in right away. I don't think anyone should ever regret anything. Life is too good and too short. You know, I have a granddaughter who is a really good soccer player, but she can take herself out of a soccer game by making a mistake and dwelling on it, and just, you know, she loses it. And I think in our lives, you make a mistake or you fail to try to do something, don't look back, just keep going. I tell people all the time, try to have amnesia about the mistakes you make. Just forget them and go on, go forward.
Great advice. Mrs. Mcnair, I know you talked about your husband when his when he lost his work and how he was even-tempered, and I wouldn't say it didn't bother him, but you know, he had a plan to move forward. So I think about that and being able to, you know, when some form of adversity comes, that you have a plan to move to get out of that. So I kind of equate that so with what he was saying about, you know, don't be even-tempered, and you know, don't let the small stuff get in your way, because sometimes that can be a barrier to your success of, you know, being hot-tempered or not being able to handle adversity. So I think about that. You gave a great example of how your husband was able to deal with that. So thank you.
Thank you. I think the point also was really, because you're going to have obstacles and things are going to come your way, that everything isn't going to go your way. And I think what I learned out of that, actually from him, is, you know, you don't lose it, or if you do, you let that fall go over real quick, because what you have to do is move on. You got to move on to you with your life or with whatever it is. You got to move on. And the only way you can do that successfully would be to think about it. Think about what you need to do. What's your next step? Don't just lose it and, oh, you know, and that's what he did. He didn't really have time to just lose it. He had to start thinking, and that's what he did. I admire that he could start that right away, thinking right away. And and told me give me a minute. And so that's what he needed. He needed a minute or two. And after thinking that minute or two or whatever, however long something takes to think it over, you think it over and you think of a route that gets you where you were trying to go. And that's what he did. He thought of what he needed to do to reach his goal. So, yeah, I learned not to lose it because I was wondering, what are you going to do? But he showed me what you're going to do is you're going to think about it first and then come up with a solution, a route, and not lose it, because if you lose it, you will totally lose it. But to think about it and come up with a solution. Don't just let it go and forget about it and give up. Don't give up. Think it through.
And I like to use the analogy. It's if you fall, it's not about how you fell, and it's how you get up after you've fallen. So make sure that you pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep right on going, and never stop short of reaching your dreams.
Yeah, good point. Very good.
I have one more question. I have another question. So you all have all of these accolades I'm just in awe of. So what are your next steps as of now? I know Captain Willie said he has his nonprofit and as well as Ms. Mcnair, but what other things are you doing aside from the nonprofits? What do you do to decompress, or any other things? What do you do?
I think, I'll close out my time with you. I try now because I'm 75 years old, which is still a year or two younger than Guy, but life has been really good, but still there's so much left to do. I'm blessed with 4 grandchildren, now a 3-month-old grandson, and then my middle granddaughter, who's a soccer player at Howard University here in DC, another one who's about to graduate from Virginia Tech, and one who's a sophomore in high school. And I figure my job now is to continue to try to be a role model for them, to encourage them in everything that they do. And try to, I think as Ron, Cheryl, Willie, all of us have done, is to try to just live our lives in a way that people will want to emulate what we do. I call myself a person of faith, so I try to participate in my church and try to be a role model there again. And that's all I can do.
When it's in you, it's in you, and that's a great to know. And good luck with your grandkids and college and soccer and everything. And 75 years young, looking good. Well, did anyone have any other questions that they would like to put in the chat?
I'll follow up on that last question.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm very fortunate to be married to a woman that I've been married to for 57 years. She is blind. She is blind. She's been losing her eyesight since she was about 30, slowly but surely losing her eyesight. And I have been amazed at this lady who has endured through all of this. One of the things that I've tried to do is make sure she sees the world. We've gone all over the world. We've been in over 100 countries. So I've tried to extend her experience level as much as possible. But over the last several years, she is blind. And she has handled that very well. I work with her daily on learning how to read Braille, which is interesting. I've learned to read Braille and she's learning to read Braille, and the two of us read Braille every morning. So, and I have to admit, I'm married to a woman who is blind, who is busier than a one-armed bandit, because she's in 3 book clubs, and she goes to church twice a week, and she's got friends coming by, and I keep telling people I am her seeing eye dog. That's all I do, you know. But then also, interesting enough, because she has slowly but surely lost her eyesight, I have become the shopper around the house, the housekeeper, the person who cleans the house, all that sort of stuff. All the things that she used to do, I ended up picking it up. So I learned to appreciate all that. But I'm amazed at a person who has slowly but surely lost her eyesight. She's completely blind. She's very comfortable in that role. I work real hard to make sure she is. And she's handled it very well. A person who has faced adversity and has handled it very well. And I think that's probably one of the keys to success, is to be able to face adversity head on and proceed forward, and to still be able to be an accomplished person. And so I'm very fortunate to be married to a lady called Linda.
Thank you for sharing your story about your wife. And it looks like she's a busy woman. She has a great husband. Well, I want to thank you all, Mrs. Mcnair, Captain Willie, Dr. Bluford. I want to thank you all for joining us, answering our questions, and showing us a piece of you and your legacy. So I really appreciate everything. And I'm trying not to cry because it's excitement and just hearing your story. So I am just so ecstatic about this. So thank you all for joining us today. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Miss Lisa Sims.
Thank you, Mayan. And thank you to all our STEM pioneers for sharing your experience with us. I am Lisa Sims, the lead faculty advisor for the Women in STEM. And I know everybody has just been blessed to hear about how our panelists have persevered through their STEM careers, and that has motivated us and encouraged us to do more and to not give up on our journey. And I just want to thank them for being here, and I thank you for being here as well. And I want to encourage you to join the Women in STEM. We have 2 ways that you can do that. You can join either via UAGC Connect, or you can also join via our LinkedIn group, and I will go ahead and put that in the chat. And so that way you can be a part of our organization, and you can stay abreast of our events that will be going on, so that you won't miss exciting webinars such as this one. And then also I want to invite you to go ahead and save the date for October the 29th from 1 p.m. Pacific time to 2:30 Pacific time. We're going to have our cybersecurity awareness event, and we're going to have panelists from Microsoft who are going to speak to us about different areas of cybersecurity, such as the dark web and other cybersecurity areas that we may or may not be aware of. So I highly want to encourage you to join us there, and I will put the flyer for that event also in the chat so that you can have that and you can go ahead and register for that event. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. And we once again thank everyone who attended. We thank our STEM pioneers, and we thank our attendees for tuning in and stay abreast of what's coming next for the Women in STEM. And remember to continue to persevere. And even though you have obstacles, you can overcome those obstacles to do greatness. And so with that, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, all of our panelists. And we want to also give a special thank you to all of our historical Black colleges and universities who attended with us today. Florida, FMU, thank you for attending, and others who may not have spotted your name in the chat. Thanks to everyone who attended, all of our panelists as well.